Welcome back, lovely friends and followers. Today we're having a look at a fourth major factor behind canine reactive behaviour, which is frustration. So far we've looked at anxiety, at fearfulness and impulsivity, and today it's the turn of frustration. So we're going to look at what frustration is so that you're really clear on what causes it. And then we're going to look at this mystical thing called frustration tolerance. And once we've straightened all that out, we'll be able to look at the importance of teaching our dogs to tolerate life's minor frustrations. So grab yourself a drink and a snack and let's get into it. So in my work with reactive dogs, I see many dogs who are simply unable to cope on lead or behind barriers. So you may even have heard this called lead or leash frustration or barrier frustration, or even leash aggression, barrier aggression. So we do need to be clear about what these things mean though, what causes them and what we can do about them. But once you understand frustration, you'll begin to see that you may have very little success, if any, with stopping your dog from barking and lunging at other dogs unless you deal with frustration first. So as you know by now, I always like to start by clarifying my terms. Frustration is absolutely no different. So what is frustration? So one definition from Amstel in 1962 is that frustration is an emotional reaction after a given expectation is violated. So what does that mean? Well, first it means we have to have expectations. So what are the expectations of a lunging dog? Quite often dogs like these are the don't worry he's friendly dogs that may even of course problems for our own. You know, the kind of the off-lead dogs whose guardians have got zero recall skills, they don't seem to even care, the off-lead dogs who feel a compulsion as well to approach and engage with every single dog or human that they meet. So no bones about it, these dogs are often off-lead because they would be reactive on it. So sometimes the guardians may actually feel that the dog needs more socialisation, but what they mean by that is that they think their dog needs to meet more dogs, as if repeating the exact same behaviour pattern another 500 times will make their manners less rough. So we also need to clarify that for these dogs, interaction is highly reinforcing. These dogs are often what I call the trial by ordeal dogs. So that, you know, where you had a choice in medieval Britain of being able to choose how you were going to get into a trial or a combat. And they're the kind of dogs who race up and engage with another dog that they don't know. And sometimes that's in rough play, sometimes it's uncouth greeting, sometimes it's even behavioural posturing, sometimes it's overt submission. So they might, you know, run up, roll on the back and wiggle or start trying to lick the other dog's face. But all of these are dogs who feel compelled to interact with another dog. They're not dogs who can cope with a situation where they can't interact with them. And so quite often I find that guardians leave these dogs off the lead because they're slightly better off the lead and they're not having to deal with all of the frustration. And those are often the kind of dogs that, as guardians of reactive dogs, we're the ones that are terrified of those kind of dogs approaching us. So these kind of dogs simply must engage. It's not a question of being able to hold them back. No dog or human, even if they are reactive to strangers, can escape this trial by ordeal that they're going to put us through. So because it's necessary for them, or even because it's pleasurable, when dogs are not permitted to do this trial by ordeal by running up to us and doing whatever it is that they are going to do, interacting with us is a blanket term, it's frustrating for them when they can't. So let's not mince words. It's not natural for dogs to need to greet every other dog or human being, or indeed to expect to do so. So I'm a city girl at heart, despite living for 15 years in the sticks, and I've stayed in some of the biggest cities on earth. Did I feel the need to greet 30 million people in Tokyo, to bow to every single one of them, to shake all of their hands? No, I did not. Yeah, that's what often we see with frustrated dogs, that they feel the need to do this. And we may ask ourselves why they feel the need to do this. Sometimes it's just learning history, sometimes it's just lack of appropriate socialisation, sometimes it's fear and anxiety, sometimes it's the need to control the situation. But unlike primates and humans are a fusion-fission species, so we split up and come together periodically. Dogs are not like this. And what we know from free-ranging dogs is that they're largely territorial. They don't form big social groups like human beings do. And for other canids like wolves, we see, you know, to see an unfamiliar wolf in your territory is highly irregular and highly threatening. So wolf research groups theorise that, other than through human means, wolves killing other wolves is a major cause of death in wolf populations. And of course, we don't like to think of our little Bichon on the couch being like that, do we? Dogs are different. We know this. They are more gregarious socially, like we are different from chimpanzees who would do the same to an unfamiliar chimpanzee who came into their territory. So dogs like us are more gregarious socially, and their whole family system is different. But even so, greetings and partings, and that's important, can be fraught with tension. And we're going to look at this more when we look at territorial behaviour, because that will help us understand things as well. Well, that said, this fusion of coming together, fusion? Yes, fusion is coming together, and fission, the splitting up. It's not natural to dogs to do that, and it's fraught with tension when you don't know the other dog or when you don't know the other human being. It's not actually that natural for human beings either. We've got so many ways to greet. Do the wrong one and you find yourself feeling very awkward. So in France, for instance, how many times do you kiss cheeks? 2, 3, 4? You know, it's very much about geography, and then you have to know sometimes, then it's also about the person that you're with. So I find it very disconcerting if somebody goes to kiss me 4 times, like, what are you doing? It's also about, you know, whereabouts in the country you are, but hop 24 miles across the channel, you may find it awkward to even shake hands. Certainly if you give someone a French kiss in the street, the cheek-to-cheek kiss, not the kind of with tongues down the throat, they may find that very awkward. They would definitely find that awkward if you stuck the tongue down the throat. But can you imagine the awkwardness, for instance, of an American bear hugging a reserved Japanese individual? So greetings for us are codified and stylized and ritualized in ways that we often don't think about, and can be very awkward culturally when we're thinking about our own coming together and going apart. So often humans forget that strangers and interactions are fraught with difficulty, even if for us, when we manage to brush up alongside each other pretty well, even in a city of 29 million individuals. But we forget that even when greetings seem to go smoothly for dogs, a lot of the time those greetings are actually really uncomfortable. I can't know what I know and look at a group of dogs coming together and not see that union being fraught with tension, even if we think our dogs are really super good at greeting. So even those dogs we think are really, really amazing at greeting, to the experienced eyes, often we see nothing but discomfort, anxiety. So humans forget that strangers and interactions are fraught with danger and difficulty, and we need to bear that in mind when we're thinking about why our dogs are frustrated. And for some of our dogs, they are the ones who need to control the situation by this trial by ordeal, by racing up to the other dog, by putting them to the test, by seeing what the other dog's response is. And if they can't do that, then it's very frustrating because they can't control the situation in the same way. So for the frustrated dog, seeing another dog comes with a history of needing to interact with or engage with them, and their expectation of being able to do that is violated. So therefore frustration behaviours like barking or lunging increase. So according to neuroscientist Jack Panksepp, frustration can also arise from mild activation of the rage system, which is followed by the thwarting of desires, so they can't get what they need or they want. So it's not uncommon, therefore, for this behaviour to tip over into snapping and biting, even if the dog is, you know, one of the it's okay, he's friendly kind of dog. What I often see with frustration-based reactivity is just like a lot of noise, a lot of lunging, a lot of really big behaviours, but they only happen when the dog is on the lead. And when the dog's off the lead, you'll often see the charging up, the engagement, the need to interact. And so any number of usually pretty rough greeting styles. These are not dogs who are really socially competent. Any number of those rough greeting styles might be in play. But one thing remains true, that the dog will 100% want to engage, even if the other dogs are giving off warning signals or even if they're threatening. So at no point, for instance, does Liddy not look threatening. No point do I look like I'm not threatening when I'm with her. And so for a dog to kind of approach us in that circumstance when we're both giving off all of the signals of no, go away, then that for me is really unusual, and that for me tells me that there's a compulsion for that dog, that they have to run up and engage with us for whatever reason. So it may be with other dogs, for instance, but whether those dogs are familiar or not, but it can also be with humans. So there can be an awful lot of trial by ordeal where the dog's interaction history shows that they 100% feel that they must greet every individual at the encounter. And the majority of times those are going to go fairly well, but they're going to be rough and they're going to be fairly unpleasant and they're going to be tense. And even though I'm really not necessarily a fan of dogs greeting each other on lead, for me, letting our dogs who are frustrated off the lead all the time to go and have those encounters, number one, it reinforces their belief that they absolutely need to engage with the other dog instead of engaging with you or letting you handle the situation. But it also teaches them that they need to do that because of the outcome of that, that it teaches them whether the dog is safe or not. And it seems that without that trial by ordeal, that a lot of dogs can't make the decision about whether the other dog is safe or not, or sometimes with the other human being as well, because dogs can do that with humans too. So underneath this, there can also often be fear. So why does our dog feel the need to engage with every individual, be they dog or human being? So as I said at the beginning, I'm a gregarious city girl from the north of England. I'll chat to people on buses, I will chat to you in queue, I will chat to you on the train, I will chat to you over the internet. And I often frighten southerners by this random engagement in conversation on the tube, as if I'm some kind of northern serial killer, or, you know, I'm just waiting for the toilet. And I'm a friendly person, and that's what we do in the north to diffuse that tension. But I still don't feel the need to chat to everyone, especially if they don't feel safe or if they're disengaged from me. I wouldn't kind of, if somebody's sitting like this gentleman on the bench here reading a newspaper, go over and start getting in his face and trying to talk to him. You know, I'm not going down the road greeting everyone I see or randomly chatting to people who are trying desperately to disengage with me on the train. So if you're involved in looking at your phone, reading a paper on your laptop, I don't feel compelled to get in your face or start a game of wrestling with you. And yet this is what some of our dogs are doing. So what sometimes we see is that need to engage with dogs that are not willing to engage, and that can be a problem, because what's happening there is the dog who is frustrated isn't reading the other dog's signals very well, doesn't understand them very well, and is choosing to ignore them anyway. And we do get dogs, sometimes singleton dogs I find, who find playing with other dogs to be highly rewarding. So sometimes it's for the contact, it's sometimes because they want to engage with the other dog to play, and they struggle to cope when they're not permitted. So I find that sometimes puppy classes in the UK and in France and in the United States can encourage this, because what they teach the dog is that not only do you have the right to interact with every other person or every other dog, you also, that's perfectly natural kind of behaviour. So in a way, some of our puppy classes, the way that they're designed, are actually setting dogs up to think that they should engage. And certainly some of our puppy programmes beyond the puppy classes are recommending that, you know, we have this many we have 100 interactions with 100 different individuals, including, you know, adult dogs, adult human beings, people with walking sticks and so on. Where in fact, what we might be thinking about, it might be better for our puppies to get used to the fact that there will be people around and there will be dogs around, and they don't need to engage with, and in certain circumstances that they shouldn't engage with, every other individual. So that can be part of the problem, I think, that often we've got dogs who are either socially naive and don't realise or don't care that the other dog is giving off stress signals, or also that they feel like they've got the right or the need to interact with every other dog. And what happens is we worsen this by the sometimes rule. So frustration is a side effect of both negative punishment. If you're a dog trainer, you'll know what that means, and also extinction protocol. So it's basically where we don't get what we want, and sometimes that's on a permanent basis, that we never get to have what we want, and sometimes on a temporary basis that we get it under certain circumstances if we behave ourselves or so on. And so we get this with our dogs, that we've got the sometimes rule which is in place, and that for me worsens this frustration. So, you know, these are often the dogs that if you ask that well-known dog trainer, Mr. Facebook, you'll be told to just ignore it. And the trouble is that, so just ignore the barking, the lunging and so on. The trouble is, though, that when we occasionally allow our dogs to interact, then it's never clear to the dog that they don't have the right to interact today. So they're very ambivalent about what the rules are, because the rules are very ambiguous. So they don't know, am I supposed to interact? Am I not supposed to interact? And if they're working on the basis of, I'm supposed to interact, this is, you know, 100% thing, then it is frustrating when they're not allowed to have that interaction. And what we can't have are dogs who feel that they have the absolute right or the need to interact with every other dog. That's not normal behaviour. That's not normally how things work out. And we worsen this behaviour in a way because whatever behaviour the dog is doing, it can be really loud, it could be really obnoxious on lead behaviour, but we also reinforce it by letting them off the lead and escape all those aversive and unpleasant feelings, and we reinforce it by letting them interact with other dogs when they're in that condition. So we've got a double whammy there of reinforcement for some dogs. They're let off the lead in order to interact, and that they then get to go and interact with other dogs. So Kevin McPeak's wonderful 2018 study on frustration gave canine professionals a free tool, which is wonderful, to explore the extent to which frustration is driving behaviour, and other behaviours as well. And it's a really useful way to think about frustration because it groups behaviour so that you can identify exactly how of your dog's reactive behaviour is driven by frustration. So in the last video, I showed you a video of Liddy in the vet's yard, and you could see that her behaviour was incredibly explosive, incredibly impulsive behaviour. And when I've completed this questionnaire for her, I saw that actually she deals with frustration really well, and I can tell that. Like, what does she do when I'm not available? She goes and lies down on the couch. She's got her coping strategies for what to do when she can't get what she wants, and she deals with it really, really well. I posted this week as well a video where she was trying to catch shrews this week on Facebook, and you can see, you know, she's not a dog who struggles, in fact, to control her impulses in some circumstances, but she's not a frustrated dog. She really is not barking and jumping at the fence trying to get to the shrews on the other side of it. But there is one area where she was frustrated, and that's when I'm petting another dog and she'll come and she'll nudge her way in. So that behaviour is, again, a symptom of frustration. So it's a really insightful tool. So in his materials, Kevin McPeak explored how frustration lies behind a lot of situations that may be very different, and explained why our dogs are frustrated in some circumstances and not in others. So, you know, for instance, they might not just be frustrated on the lead or with the barrier, but also he looked at how frustration ties into aggression. So one of my very first clients was a lady who lived with her three small, I think, Lhasa Apsos, and they would bark at the window every time anyone went past outside. And invariably, one of the dogs would end up attacking the other. And this kind of redirected anger where you can't get to the individual you want to get to, so that you then turn on whoever's closest, is fueled in part by frustration. So frustration can also lie behind aggressive behaviours, which is why sometimes those behaviours tip over when, say, for instance, our dog is approached or they get in a, you know, quite easy to get into a fight. Because when they don't get what they want quickly enough, or when items are removed from them, that can cause frustration too. And another side effect of frustration that McPeak explored was how it leads to repetitive or destructive behaviours as well. So how do we get from 0 to hero? So our first step is always to understand the behaviour, and you just spent 15 minutes doing that. Reduce frustration until they can cope better. So that relies on us to manage the situation and not put our dogs into the deep end where they can't cope. We also need to do another thing as well. We can't just manage our dogs' lives for the rest of them, can we? We need to teach our dogs to tolerate frustration. And what that means is that they can accept that sometimes there are going to be delays. Sometimes they're not going to get what they want. And we've not got to assume that this is going to automatically happen. So you're going to find a link in the description to some work that I wrote about parameters and teaching dogs yes or no, that this can happen and this can't happen, but also to building frustration tolerance as well. So what we need to help them to do is to learn to work around distractions of increasing need. So we're going to start with it easy, and we're going to make it much harder. Now, I have a problem about how much I eat and what I want to eat. Sometimes I would find it very frustrating, for instance, if I was working, say, for instance, in a sweet shop and I couldn't eat the sweets that I was working around. So I'd be working up to that and not starting with that. Maybe you'd start me off in the broccoli department and I would be fine with that until I can cope with working with broccoli, and then move me up to the sweet department at the very end. And that's what we've got to do with our dogs, that we've got to introduce those gradual steps for frustration much more in a very, very finely graded, finely shaved procedure than we would with other dogs. You know, they have more needs than those other dogs. We also need to help them learn to disengage rather than just expecting it. And we need to learn to help them focus on other things. So I find focus games are really helpful. Now, you can get them to focus on you. You can get them to focus on an activity or whatever it is that you're doing. What we can't do is just expect them to be able to do it. We also need to help them be able to disengage. And sometimes we're going to have to take responsibility for that. And that will mean cueing them to do certain things rather than just letting it happen and then trying to call them back afterwards. I think it's really important that we create a supportive environment for our dogs and we introduce levels of challenge gradually, because one of the hardest things for dogs who are frustrated is that if you make too big a leap, then that frustration is just going to come back again. So as we're teaching it, we're going to have to keep doing that work often, gradually, subtly, and make sure that we keep doing it. And we need to actively teach frustration management skills for some dogs. You know, it's great if you've got a dog who just tolerates frustration naturally and doesn't have to cope with life's minor disappointments. But for some dogs, they're going to need a lot more structure than we would afford to other dogs, just like some children are going to be different and they're going to need some help to support them so that they're not having tantrums when they can't get what they want. Because that's basically what we're seeing on the lead, isn't it? When we've got a reactive dog who's frustrated, is we're seeing a tantrum. And that's why sometimes those behaviours are so large and so big. So over on Facebook, I'm posting this weekend 3 short activities that you can do to start building frustration tolerance. I'll also link to you in the comments below a blog that I wrote about building frustration tolerance and one about building parameters, which teaches about impulse control as well, but on and off switches, when to, when not to, so that our dog isn't, you know, like a primary school child who can't understand that you can run outside but you can't run inside, where the boundaries are not clear and they don't understand the context. And that's what we've really got to teach our reactive dogs is, yes, you can engage, and no, you can't, but when those are going to be, so that they're clear about the times that they can interact and the times that they can't. And what I'm also going to do is that you will find in the notes underneath, you'll find links to those materials as well. So you'll find those too. But I really seriously think that we're not going to make progress with reactive dogs unless we are dealing with that frustration first. Because if you've got a dog who can't tolerate frustration, all that you're going to do, whether the dog is 2 meters away, whether the dog is 500 meters away, is you're just going to see that same level of frustration. And if you're trying to work in those circumstances and the dog's not in control, then you're just following it's a futile pathway that you're going down there. So it is something that I like to work on first, because once that's out of the way, actually helping them to deal with the fears that underlie that are much easier. It's so tempting to think that socialisation is the answer to frustrated related problems, that if they just get the right amount of socialisation, that leash frustration will disappear. But actually that's not true, and all we tend to be doing in those circumstances is just reinforcing this belief that they absolutely must interact with every single other dog in order to diffuse the situation, that kind of trial by ordeal. And I think we really need to step away from that and teach our dogs that, do you know what, there are times when you just don't get to engage with other stuff. You just can't. It's not possible. That can get you into difficulties. It can be dangerous. Certainly I've read stories and I know of dogs who have been off lead and approached the wrong dog and have been severely attacked or have also been killed. And you know, no blame on either side there. It's just one of those things that happens. But if a dog is standing there on lead and is throwing out all kinds of angry behaviours, then it takes a special kind of dog to run up anyway and to try and engage in play. And for me, I find that quite sad that these dogs don't really understand what it is that's happening there, and they don't understand why this other dog has reacted in the way that they do. And luckily for those dogs who are off lead and who run up to ours all the time, most of the dogs that they're going to meet, even ours, aren't going to put them at too much risk. But there is going to come a day when that's going to happen. So it's not good practice to just think that socialisation with any kind of random dog that they come across, or you know, mate's mate or some bloke that you've met down the pub, that his dog is going to be a good dog for yours to interact with. Remedial or restorative socialization is going to be part of that process for dogs, for some dogs who are reactive. Some dogs are just not going to want that, but I tend to find they're not frustrated greeters, are they? They are certainly not dogs who want to race up to other dogs, who would certainly choose to disengage with them if they could. So it is really important skill for us to get through, and throughout the lighten up journey you'll be finding those materials as we roll out, but just wanted you really to get your head around what frustration is, why it causes so many problems, and to really understand that it's okay, he's friendly. Dogs are probably frustrated, and their owners are probably going to be suffering the exact same things that your dog would be, much to our detriment, because it's causing a lot of our dogs' problems, unfortunately. Anyhow, don't forget to subscribe if you want regular updates, and click the thumbs up in the YouTube bit down below to let me know if you'd like more content like this.